Yeah, so today, tutorial 3, intro to mixing. So before the tutorial, I prepared a little bit of a track here, which I might as well play for you guys just to get a little sense of the vibe that we're going for today. Yeah, first things first, kind of a little bit of a lo-fi vibe, but I think it is a good starting point on. It's like a simple track that can be used to do simple mixing. So, first thing, what is mixing? Well, the easiest, or how I'd describe it, is basically adjusting individual tracks to blend together rather than create some sort of muddiness. And it's pretty easy to get muddy sounds. And today I'll be walking you through how to kind of avoid doing that with a surefire technique. I'm by no means a professional mixer, but this is a pretty easy and pretty effective way to do it. So, first thing we're going to start with is obviously we've got our tracks here. And the easiest way to get caught up and sort of what's the word for it? But the easiest way to fall victim to sort of a muddy sound is to just be too loud. So right here, even before like I started this, let me turn the mic so I can get a little better audio. But yeah, so the first thing I've done here is actually turn down all of the individual track volumes to about -10, give or take. I kind of just adjusted it preemptively to make the intro sound good. But yeah, so that's what you want to start with, is kind of toning down the initial mix, because I don't want to blast people's ears off, but if you look down here at the master channel, if I play this audio, this green bar right here, it's not actually pushing up all the way. If it goes too far, then you start to see sort of a red effect here. So for example, I'll just turn up the volume. Well, I actually don't have any of the tracks loud enough for that to happen. So yeah, that's what I'd recommend doing to start here, is to lower all of the individual track volumes down to about -10. It'll help like reduce the chance of like clipping. I keep hitting the mic. And it gives room to breathe, basically. And you want to do that when you're making songs, because it's much easier to turn up the volume to a track than to turn down the volume, you know. All right. So, first things first, let's take a look at EQ in general. So I've got one here on the master track, which basically encompasses the entire arrangement. So all of the tracks here on the right, they're all condensed into this master track. So I've got this EQ here with 4 points. I'm going to click this arrow up here. If you click this, it basically turns into a bigger spectrum. If you click it down, it keeps it more compact. So personal preference, I like to keep it here, but for purposes of this video, I'm going to keep it in the sort of bigger perspective. So EQ, what does it do? What is it change in music? Well, so let's say I want to. Let's say I don't like the bassy frequencies in the music. I can turn. I can click down here to this drop box and change this to a sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but with that, or this times 4, you can actually fully just drag it up. And just like that, you've basically cut out a bunch of frequencies. So that's basically what EQ does, is it takes the track that you're using and it can sort of isolate a certain frequency in that track that you want to make more prominent over the other frequencies. So, one other example here. To showcase what I mean by you want certain things to be like showing up more than others, I'm actually just gonna mute this bass and the kick drum. I'm actually gonna drag that closer to the top. But yeah, if I mute both of these two, this is actually what the this is what it sounds like beforehand, or what the this is what the waveform sounds like, rather, or what it looks like, I guess. So we're getting like a decent spread all along. But let's say I take out the bass and the kick. What does it look like now? You don't see much below the 100 at all. And that's because I've actually EQ'd each of these individual tracks so that only specific parts are being shown and actually being fed through to the mastering chain. So in a similar case, I'm going to hide the other tracks and you'll see what the waveform looks like. So for the most part, all of the volume is centralized in the lower end of the frequency chart here. But I'm going to add these back for now because obviously sounds better put together. Lots of sirens going on outside. Anyways, let's see what I've got here next on my notes. Oh, okay. Yeah. So, once again, coming back to the mids here. So I'm going to cut out the... Actually, I'm just going to solo this audio sample that I've taken. A free audio sample I've taken from Splice. That I have an EQ on. So right here, as you can see, I can expand it up here. So for you to get a better visual of it, I've got all of this low end cropped out. But say I turn off the EQ. Notice how it gets pretty muddy, and it's an entire like wave of, or spectrum of audio that you see, including down in the low frequency range. So I'm gonna turn that back on because that does not sound very good. This sounds much cleaner with the lows cut out. And then it makes it much easier to layer in a bass. Nice. Yeah. So basically, to summarize that, is we don't need the instruments to do things that they don't need to do. So, for example, like I said, we don't necessarily need the sub frequencies from this vocal sample, or for the piano, for example. We don't need the low ends. We have that filled through a sub bass or through a kick drum. That'll take the edge off and make it more balanced, and will take away muddiness. Say I play the audio as it is now. It's pretty clean. Oh, did the mouse just break on me? Oh, no. But yeah, so let's say, yeah. Oh. Let's say I were to take away the EQ. See, if you like bass, that might be nice, but at the same time, there's two sub frequencies there, which can sort of blend together and mesh in a way that isn't necessarily a good thing. So it's best to just cut it out and let the instruments do what they need to do. And the ones that don't need to fill that role, we can take it out basically. So yeah. All right, so there are two types of EQs on Ableton, and that is your EQ8, which I have here, but there's also the EQ3, which I'm going to drag down here. I'm going to solo this piano track. So that's without any EQing. That's with my EQ8. So I personally prefer the EQ8, but if you only have access to the EQ3, it looks a little different and you don't have the same visual perspective, but it does handle the same sort of things. So say, what are we doing here? Well, we're cutting out the low frequencies. So how can we do that here? Well, if you look here, we see gain low, gain mid, and gain high. So you can actually adjust those up or down as you please. So if I want to cut most of the lows out, well, I'll just play this as I go, but so we've already lost most of the lows. Might not be the best instrument choice, but it does handle the same things, and it just looks a little different, and you don't get what I prefer, the actual visual representation, but it functions the same way. And to show kind of what it does, what I'm going to do is go into this master track and add an EQ3. Oh, I'm going to unsolo this. Oops. And so firstly, I'm going to turn down the gain low, and I'll show you what it would sound like. So turning that down will basically reduce the sub frequencies. And in a similar story, the high end will handle more of the percussive, sort of high-pitched, almost, yeah, just percussive sounds. So what happens if I take away the entire mid frequency? Well, then we should mostly just hear sub and kind of weird little percussive things. So I'm going to try that. that's what those three gains do on the EQ3. But for today, I'm going to stick with the EQ8, but that's if you don't have access to the EQ8. The EQ3 is a useful tool nonetheless. Alrighty, so next up, I'm going to talk about something called subtractive EQ. So subtractive EQ is when you kind of want to take away specific frequencies, like not necessarily just cutting out the entire low end or the high end or the mids, but like individual small frequencies. So for example, I'm going to use this grand piano that I've done. It's just the free grand piano that comes with Ableton. Once again, I'm going to solo the track. And I'm going to actually, for this example, I'm going to use the entire array of the EQ or the sound. So this is more common even with like guitar, or I guess piano or guitar, but a lot of the times audio engineers don't like to have a sort of, they refer to it more as like a boxy sound. So they don't want any unnecessary frequencies coming through. So there's a way to target specific sort of like, specific small segments of frequency along this chart. And that is by using one of the 2 or 3, or you can add more in if you'd like, if there's more frequencies you want to target. But for example, I'm going to select the 2 frequency here, and oops, I'm going to play from the beginning. So this 2 frequency I can bring up all the way. So as I go along here, there are specific frequencies that, as you can see, stick up. So right here is roughly where the root note would be. And this is the octave up. But above that, there are other frequencies that we may not like. So to make it actually easier to see, I'm going to go down into this track and I'm going to lower the octaves of this piano line. I might make it a little easier to see on the equalizer. So all of these little spikes here are extra frequencies. They're a part of the harmonic sequence that is above each note that's being played. So, say I'm playing like a C. Hear that extra little ring that doesn't quite sound like a C, that's a little above the rest of the note? Well, I'll try to make it a bit easier to hear by turning the rest of the track down, but there's sort of like a little ring that you might be able to hear. I'm not sure, but basically, using this, you can target those specific frequencies that don't necessarily work with what you're trying to do, and you can get rid of them. So similar to finding them by going along here and targeting specific ones, you can drop down. So there's a frequency here that I'm not a huge fan of. So if I want to cut this out, I can do it like this. But this is it covers a pretty broad area. So I'd probably want to isolate it a little bit better because it's kind of affecting a pretty big range. So how you do that is actually under the specific frequency number correlating to the knob you adjusted. So I picked number 2 here. So if I go into number 2, it's actually this Q slider here. So I can adjust that. I can move it down, or I can move it all the way up. So once again, this is more commonly used in guitar, but it's still a useful tool to get rid of some like muddy sounds that don't necessarily work. In all of these spikes, there's an overtone that kind of is layered on top of the note that's being played, so we can basically get rid of those to your discretion. There isn't too many tones in a piano that I personally am not or there aren't too many tones that I'm personally not a huge fan of, because I love the piano. But yeah, that's a way to deal with those tones, especially if you play guitar. Yeah. So that's basically all there is when it comes to EQing basics. But next I want to talk about is some basic audio effects and how to order those audio effects. So I've got one channel here. It's not this one. It might be the piano too. Where I have the grand piano, I have an EQ, I have a delay, and I've got a compression. Now, what do all of these mean? So, once again, I'm gonna, for an example, I'm gonna lower the octave of, oops. So this is what it sounds like without any effects. And obviously you've heard with the EQ. But what do these other effects mean? Well, delay is basically an effect that sort of echoes the sound that you were playing. So I'm going to leave this one in here just because this is the one that I like. But if you go into your audio effects, go into delay and loop, there are plenty of options and plenty of drop downs like beat, repeat, delays, with even more like subfolders with specific pre-programmed delays. And yeah. So let's say, for example, let's look in echo. We'll go modulated delay and flanged out. This one might be a little... See how there's a little bit of an echo effect, but I think this was probably a bad example. This one is more so of a flanger effect, but Once again, there's lots of different options here for delay effects. And if I go back to the one that I have, I've got it on a bit of a dry, I've got it a bit dry right now, which you might see that on a lot of different instruments or effects. Dry or wet is basically how much of this effect you want to ring through. So right now I've just got a little bit, so it gives it a little touch of the delay. And say I turn that up. It starts to get a little chaotic. It's going to keep going for a while. But yeah, basically it takes what's being played and I've currently got it set to the ping pong feature, which means it bounces from your left and your right ear on the echo, and it gives it kind of a cool effect. It adds a little something that, once again, it might work with what you're trying to do, maybe not, but it's an interesting thing to keep in mind. Then with EQ, now here's another thing that I forgot to add to this slide, but I would like to mention, and that is reverb. So reverb is basically what it's the effect for dragging out a sound, and it kind of adds, like, on the last note, it kind of just fades out after that. I don't really know how to properly describe it, but that is in your reverb and resonance. Once again, there's a lot of different reverbs and resonance, but if you go into reverb, once again, a lot of different options, hall room, special, etc. But you can also just click and drag on the reverb. I'm going to put that in front. Actually, I'm going to put that after the delay here. And now, if I play, it kind of adds a little bit of a reverby effect. And a couple of the knobs here, your size, that's basically the size of the reverb that you want. Your decay is how long it lasts afterwards. So if you crank that up, you can get some really wacky, ambient, soundscapey sort of sounds. And also, once again, the dry wet, how much of it you want to actually be used. 0% being nothing, 100% being entirely. But yeah, so that's a fun one to experiment with. I personally like keeping the dry wet pretty low. I like to give it a little bit of delay. It works well in tandem with the delay feature. And it's just an interesting, it's a nice little effect to add to your songs. So now, oh yeah, I gotta fix the octaves on these. Now, one more effect that I want to talk about is sidechain compression, which is a very useful thing if you're making dance music, lo-fi, even trap beats. It's very useful, and almost in a similar way to EQ is to keep muddiness out of a song. So, for example here, I'm gonna stop using the piano. You guys are probably getting a bit bored of that one, but I'm gonna go into this vocal sample that I've got here and solo that track. So this is what it sounds like on its own. See, that's nice and all, but if I couple it with the kick drum, when the drum is going off at the same time as there's vocals going on, you can kind of lose track of what is being said, or you kind of lose the sound a little bit. So the way to kind of clean that up a little bit is with a sidechain compression. So if you go to do that, obviously, you're going to go into your Dynamics folder and click Compressor. Oops. Yeah, we're going to bring a compressor in here, and we're going to click this drop down. So now we get access to all of this here. So if you see up here, there's a sidechain option. You're going to click that, and you get an option for audio from, and you can select the channel that has your kick drum, which I have in channel 2. So now, see, that doesn't make much of a difference, but what happens if I lower this bar down is you'll start to hear kind of it almost feels like the kick takes over the music for a second, and there's like a little breath. There's some breathing room in there. So, for example, so that's an extreme example. I'm gonna keep it up here, but that will hopefully help you understand what I mean by that. And now, if I were to play that all back together, the kick drum, if I have a compressor on each individual track, except for the kick obviously, should give it that extra room to breathe. So it's just a subtle little difference that can make the world of a difference when it comes to just the overall sound of your track. And yeah, that's mostly what I wanted to cover for today. And if you weren't like me and you kept all of your volumes low from the start, this is a good point where you can actually properly adjust the individual volumes. So I'm personally pretty happy with it, but just for the example, I'll set them all down to where I would have started with. And then I can adjust these to get the percussion a bit louder and the piano. Let's say I turn up the piano, for example, a little too loud though. Here's a simple trick to actually avoid sort of an unbalanced extra loud frequency here. And to do that, if you go into the master channel and you turn the volume all the way down, let's say to like -15. You can distinctly hear that the piano is just a little bit too loud, so you know to adjust it. And obviously it works pretty well either way, but that's a good way to tell if something is just slightly too loud. there any questions in the chat or anything that anyone would like me to go over again before I call the stream there? I'll give it a couple of minutes just in case. But yeah, so I guess in a sense that's kind of also how to make hyperpop, but not hyperpop, lo-fi. This mic's kind of getting in the way, but yeah, so that's not a bad track actually. And it makes all the world of difference if you specifically target the instruments and you cut out the frequencies that don't need to be working at the time. Like, for example, cutting out the highs of a bass or cutting out the lows of vocals or of a piano. And it all makes it blend together just a bit nicer, you know? But, yeah. Anyways, I'm not seeing anything in chat, so I think that's it for the tutorial for this week. Hope you enjoyed. I'll be back in 2 weeks with tutorial 4, and Alex will be here next week for the Logic version, the Logic version of this tutorial. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hope you have a good night. See ya.